Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you can see me to a wonderful Findmypast live. We're here again on a Friday to talk about all our wonderful new records and all the things that we've been doing. I'm just let me know if you can hear me. Everything else, waiting through some comments to come through, and we've got the lovely Niall helping us out in the comment section. So say hello to him as well. And today we've got some not only great records to talk about. We also have some. Oh, hello, Karen. So I see you all coming through. That's good. I see Anya. I see Amanda. I see Kelly. I see my microphone just keeps falling off, so that's fine. Yes, we're going to talk about migration as well, which is going to be really exciting because I think all of us have some element of migration in our family. And importantly, we're not just talking about migration from country to country, but internal migration, which I'm sure we need to talk about in detail because everyone's got some of that as well. So we're going to be really going into some things, but most importantly, let's talk about you and what you're doing. I see everything. I see Linda. I see Lynn. I see Sylvia. That's great. Hi, Rosie. Hi, Iris. Hi, everyone else. That's fantastic. I'm glad that you've come to join me on this very cold Friday now. I see winter's really started to hit. I hope it's not so cold where you are. We've had some snow, but up here in Scotland, I guess that's to be expected. I see, wow, Jones from San Carlos, Mexico, Winnipeg. Linda's in Warsaw. That's good. Just around with my family as well. That's good. Denise sees that I've migrated. I have moved house, although this is it's not quite decorated yet, so bear with us, and then we'll have something a little more pretty later. But more importantly, the records and what you're up to. So it's great that you're all. I see Gillian's got snowy Scotland as well. And it's got lots of rain. But tell us about the things that you found this week too. Every week we have a chance to catch up and see what's going on. And so there's a great chance to show off your discoveries, see if we can talk about a few. So that's quite exciting. I'm sure in the past week, if you put aside some time to start digging through records, every week there are new ones. But what about the ones that are there? Maybe you've had a clue fall into your inbox that's helped you a little bit and help you get that little bit further. I see other people talking about the weather. Sylvia's finishing an article. Lots of people with their different weathers. Yes, Rosie, the usual background. There'll be a better background, don't you worry, in time. Once I've got the right builders and the right people, we'll see. We'll have something pretty to look at. But as always, I'm always concentrating mostly on the computer screen and on all those wonderful records. So this will be something that might take some time. But yes, we're seeing people's answers to the question of the week coming through as well. That's great. The question of the week, of course, was we were talking about migration, about if your ancestors traveled, county to county, country to country, or continent to continent. Do you know those stories and do you know why they went? We're going to talk about some of those factors back and forth as well. And I see Bob in Vancouver Islands finding lots of hints in his tree. That's really exciting. Let's talk about, first of all, those wonderful new records. What do we have for you today? So every week, new records, only website that does that. New records every single Friday. We have records from all over the world, which sparked our inspiration for the question. We've got records from New York, Roman Catholic parish records. We've got 45,000 baptisms and 36,000 marriages. Huge collection from 1920, working forwards. So, of course, we've got those privacy rules. This gets to move forwards as we get to January. Sometimes you get a whole new year of records. So that's what we've got here. And if you've got any ancestors in New York, it's well worth taking a look because these can have lots of detail, particularly marriage records. You've got not only those married, you might have witnesses, you might have parents of those involved. Really useful for family history. So really great. And of course, they have the original image as well. Great to look at. Extra cool resource. We've got just in time for Australia Day. There might be some things going on next week to take a look at. I don't know of anyone who hasn't got some Australian family, people from the British Isles who've travelled over there, or people, of course, who are in Australia and watching. I see some people and they might have some going back the other way. But Victoria births, 1918 to 1920, over 100,000 records in that from the great state of Victoria. Fantastic there to take a look at. Victoria, of course, has changed in boundaries. So take a look at the older boundaries as well to see perhaps in this big collection that goes all the way back through from the establishment of Victoria, if your ancestors are in this area, and they may have moved. So take a look. And of course, there's a lot more migration across the country in Australia. People followed things like the coastal routes and things on passenger lists, which we've got as well. A lot of those from Victoria too, to see if your ancestors are inside. But that's great. Another 2 years of those. So that's fantastic. And then we've got some great newspapers. 4 whole new papers: the Midland Counties Tribune, 1895 to 96, 1898 to 1911, 1913 to 1957, the Bargoed Journal, 1905 to 1912, the monolithic Cradley Heath and Stourbridge Observer, 1881, and the Northumberland Reformer, 1894. And then we've got some more records from the Weekly Dispatch, which is from London. A lot of records from there, basically from 1801 to 1961, a nice coverage there, smattering through. Manchester Evening News from 1923, London Daily News, 1921 and 1939, Brigus and Rastrick Gazette, 1883 to 1888, 1890 to 1895. Irvine Express, might have some of my ancestors in there, I'll have to have a look at that, 1884. The Warrington Examiner, 1883, 1890, 1892 to 93, and 1895. The Herald of Wales from 1890. And last but not least, the Lancaster Standard and County Advertiser from 1901 to 1902. Huge set there, lots and lots of stories inside. And of course, they may be your local paper, which is exciting, but they probably syndicated a great number of stories too. So if you have ancestors in the local area, fantastic. Bit further afield, still good. National, still worth a look. Keep going back, keep making the same searches every once in a while and see what you get through. And then you might find more. We keep adding so many newspapers to Findmypast and British Newspaper Archive. All of them really useful. Keep looking and never give up. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on. And I said, looking at some of these things, Daphne's saying 3 Findmypast sessions in 3 days. Great service. Well, thank you very much. We've had lots to talk about and lots of wonderful things that you've been sharing that we wanted to share to others as well. So that's quite good. I see Gloria's here in Perth as well. So hopefully those Victoria records might cover your ancestors as they move towards Western Australia if they didn't start there originally. I see some migration questions as well. So we'll get to those as we talk about migration and go from there. I see Victoria, love watching Martin Clune's Australian Islands program recently. Fantastic history with stunning scenery. I don't know about that one. I actually don't have a TV, so I'm going to have to look up for that and see what it is and what's going on. And hopefully, that might be something worth taking a look at. And I'm seeing other people there talking about all of these movements. That's great. And a great reminder. So we've got Niall in the comments talking about our newspapers. You can go and look at those. That Findmypast link, and just they're down in the category search under newspapers and periodicals. You can find them there. So let's talk about the big things, the things that we all want to talk about today. Migration. I challenge you. In fact, I don't think we'll find one, but anyone whose family have stayed in the same place for as long as they can find records beginning on every branch, because I can't think of anyone that will be able to say yes to that. Mostly our family have traveled. They've traveled for a number of reasons. They've traveled back and forth. They've traveled a long way, and they've even just traveled around the corner. Travel is part of a family story, and finding the reasons behind and trying to understand that is part of what makes family history. So I'm seeing some great questions, answers coming in, reflecting that. We've got lots of migration from Anya in one branch. Over 3 generations moved from Kidlington in Oxfordshire to Hereford, to Mountain Ash in Glamorgan, and eventually to Midlothian, with a trip to Papua New Guinea. Wow, and somewhere in Africa, all linked to mining coal and gold. That's very interesting. There'll be some good mining records that might be coming soon that might be able to help you out there. I know we've got some good stories to be unfurled in the next few weeks and months with some really cool record sets that I can't yet talk about, but I know you're going to be excited. Particularly next week, one of my favorite topics is coming up, so you can look forward to that. Some very exciting things, and I know I like to tease with what's coming, but I'm sure you're going to be really excited, and there's definitely some stories in there, so look forward to that, as well as, of course, the stories that we have this week. I see Gillian has a story that is all too common. So she's got family who left Aberdeenshire to work in the granite industry in Vermont in the late 1800s. Lots and lots of people who traveled to work, say, in the United States and Australia, Canada, worked in, say, mining and working heavy labor, heavy industry. And they were sort of taken by these agents. These agents would offer them work, and they'd offer them free passage and for them and their family, and a solid job when they got on the other side, because they knew these people knew how to do this stuff. And in the States and in Australia, these new mines were being set up, these new factories, and these people needed experienced workers. So they would happily pay that money, and it would give these people an opportunity to get out and go to the new world and have a guarantee of a better life. It mostly went well, sometimes not quite. And, people did often also start in one place and then decide to strike out on their own and get a different job or something. But you can sometimes find, if you look in those newspapers, if you've got an ancestor that moved and disappeared, take a look and you might find an advertisement for a particular agent, a mining agent or something like that describes where these people might be able to find work. And it might be a good chance to take a look in that area at those records on the other side and see if you find someone with the same name when someone disappears. And that might be your clue to see where people are going. One thing that I want to share, which is one of my favorite things, and it doesn't really get picked out that much, and it's quite a strange thing, and I studied it a little bit when I did my master's degree. But there's a man named Ernst Georg Ravenstein, or Ravenstein, I can never tell which one's which. But this chap was a German folk. He was born in 1834, but he moved very quickly when he was young to London, and he worked for the War Office in Britain. And his whole job was to do with making maps and geography and population studies, all these kind of things. And he did a lot of study for the British War Office in relation to migration and how things work, everything else. And he wrote whole books about this. And I've been fascinated in reading these and seeing how things work in terms of historical migration. And he spent that whole life going through, and he came up with these rules, these set rules that you can apply to all this historic migration that still apply today. And he went through all these different migrations in history, and these rules still have been seen to be quite consistent. First of all, there was something that we've come to understand, and modern migration theory understands this. At the time, it's quite new. There's something called steppe migration, which is something to think about. Steppe migration is when people don't move from the very, very rural villages somewhere right in the back end of nowhere straight to New York City or something like that, to metropolis. That's quite rare. It's more common to move perhaps from a farm to maybe a town, and then from a town to somewhere bigger. And it means that, it might take a couple of generations or something like that, but it means that you don't often get that very sharp shock of moving straight away to somewhere crazily different. It tends to happen in stages. And that's something that you can see in lots of different communities and populations. It might give you, again, a little bit of a thought as to where you might look, or plausibility of certain records. And then there are also these other big rules, and these came about in the 1880s. And we're going to go through them and see if they apply to yourself, or at least give you some clues. And then we'll start looking at some of your questions as well, and see if we can add some more detail to those. If you've got any migration-based questions as well, put them in, and we'll see if we can have an answer, see if anyone else might have any thoughts too. So first of all, the first rule: every migration generates a counter migration. So every time you say, let's say people moving to New York in the 1800s, that means that there are also some people leaving New York in the 1800s. Much smaller, but it means that there's also people who are getting out at the same time people are getting in. So, it's not a sealed bag where people come in. So that's one thing to remember. Second one, most migrants tend to move a shorter distance. Short distance is common. Long distances are much harder to pull off. So when you're looking at migration, try and think, smaller distances. Particularly, said, people will move from county to county before they'll move from country to country. It's much more common. And if you think about migration, we always think about that. I know in family history terms, when we think of migration, often it's from country to country. And we forget that people who've even moved across the parish, that's another kind of migration. So that's still quite important, and it still might generate different records. So that's one thing to remember. So that short migration, your ancestors have probably done hundreds of times. You've not really thought of it being a migration, but it does generate records and it's still important. Migrants who move longer distances tend to choose big sources of economic activity. So if they are going to go a long distance, let's say again using America, they're more likely to move to somewhere like New York than some rural place in, say, Iowa or something like that. They're more likely to be found where they're going to make their money. They're going to go to find their fortune. They're not going to go to just change the scenery. They want something out of this. So that's worth thinking about as well when we're looking at that. Urban residents are often less migratory than rural. So if you're in a town, you're much more likely to move, much less likely to move than if you're in, say, a village, and you're more likely to then move to, find this better economic prospect. So that's worth thinking about as well. Families are much less likely to move than young adults. If you see people moving, if they're a young adult and they disappear, there's much more chance they might have migrated than if they're a family. So that's one thing to look at. Perhaps when we're looking at things, family vanishes, we need to look at things like mistranscriptions, use those wildcards and those extra ways of searching that I know Jen Baldwin covered in her advanced search techniques presentation, which is still up if you want to go and take a look at, to try and find perhaps a different way of spelling a surname, and that family might still be in the same place. If you're looking at censuses, try and look using the census address search and see if you can find that same property in the census afterwards and see who's in there. See if it's a member of the family or see if it's someone completely different. Most migrants are adults. That's fair. There are a few notable exceptions of children being sent across the world or in different places, but most of them tend to be adult or at least of working age. Large towns tend to grow by migration rather than population growth. So in terms of, if you look at, say, Manchester or Glasgow, somewhere like that, Birmingham, those cities really grew mostly because they sucked in people from the nearby areas because they wanted to work in these new occupations and these new factories. And so we look at, say, population of Manchester before the Industrial Revolution, it was almost a village. And then suddenly overnight, almost, it became a metropolis. And that's one thing to remember, that was almost entirely through migration, which brings about its own problems and questions, urbanization, different things. And we've luckily got those censuses from 1841 to 1901 covering that biggest point in the industrial age. So more long distance migrants are male. So if you're looking at migration and we're looking at, say, a male or female, the people who travel further tend to be men. And I've seen that in my own family tree. People who travel again to America or something like that often tend to be lone men, whereas people who travel perhaps to the county town or something like that to take a job as a servant or something like that will be women. And so you'll see that difference in the sort of where people go in that sort of way. And of course, most long distance migrants, so as we go further, are adults on their own rather than families with children. If you've got children, it's much harder to make that journey. So that's really, really important as well. So he wrote that out in this book, Laws of Migration, and those are his laws of migration, his migration theory. Hopefully you agree with all of that, and that's given you some ideas and clues. But that's something that I think, because it's so old, hasn't really been shared about enough. It's kind of been forgotten. And I think they are really, really useful tips and thoughts. And even when I read them aloud and I look at them, I think, because I can think of some examples in my head where my family's done exactly that kind of thing. So hopefully that's helped you too. Let's take a look at some of these things here. So let's take a look at some people who have stayed in the same sort of place. There we go. Karen said their ancestors farmed the same farm as far back as 1841. The Racks, just outside Dumfries. My granny and papa even lived in the bungalow next door. That's fantastic. I know in our group session, which you saw with Niall and Brian and Alex and Jen, just again, I think it was yesterday, the Brian living in the same family house for hundreds of years is a fantastic thing. And it's quite rare. So you can be proud that your ancestors are still around the same area, at least one branch of the family. I did trace a distant cousin who lived in a farm in Cumnock in Ayrshire in Scotland, and I phoned them up. I had a chat and just wanted to know how much of the old farm was still there, and there was a little bit, and we talked about it. And the family that lived there operated a construction firm, and they did some demolitions as well. And they'd actually just demolished the church that the person who owned the farm before them, obviously, a century before, built. So it was kind of an ironic thing that they were kind of, guarding the place that this family came from, but also were responsible for taking down another bit that the family built. So that was quite interesting. But we sent some pictures across and things, and it's wonderful to, again, have that bit of connection. I see Niall has posted a really interesting, useful blog. If your ancestors moved to New York, then there is a great blog there about Ellis Island that you can take a look at. The link is in the comments, and really, really useful. Linda's saying inter-county and neighbouring county will get me looking for stuff to find. Thanks. So this is the bit that I think is really, really important. I know I can see all these different stories about people traveling around the world, and we're going to cover those as well. But those people who travel, again, inside the country, some people, again, don't really recognize that so much as migration. And so there's not as much to talk about. There's not as much coverage. And I think that's just as important. I mean, let us know in the comments if you think so. If we could do a whole session at some point on these, intranational, so, in the same country migration, and see if we can, do all that sort of thing. But a few comments I would give in this sort of internal migration: always take a look at maps. Maps will really help you. Historical maps. The National Library of Scotland have a huge collection of free maps to take a look at. Look at maps from your particular area at that time that your ancestors are in there, and take a look at things like, there are lots of planning maps and things. I found some great ones. I think it might have been on Scotland's People even. I don't know where I found it. Possibly the National Library of Scotland, about on the Isle of Arran, where I've got some ancestors. There was a road being built through the middle of the island, whereas previously the road just went around the outside. And you can see exactly that, all these farms and things suddenly cropped up, the buildings around the road. And so that gives me a little bit of an idea about where these ancestors might have started on the outskirts and decided then to build a bit further in on the roadside or something like that, and give me some idea about when my ancestors may have appeared. And the same if you're in a village, not much goes on, and suddenly there's a railway that's just come through, then follow around that railway line and see perhaps maybe a stop or two stops further down might be where your ancestors might have gone to, because they've suddenly got an easy way to get there rather than having to get on a horse and cart and travel for miles, and definitely not by walking. So that's really, really important. We've got that wonderful radius search tool on Findmypast, which is really useful because of the fact that people often traveled. Half the population in the 1800s and 1700s didn't die in the parish they were born. That's a really important fact. But they tend to be within a 20-mile radius or so. So when we're looking, don't discount those things who might be a parish away or something like that. So that's really important too. Gazetteers are really useful. There are some gazetteers on Findmypast, lots on other websites like archive.org and things like that. And look at a particular parish that your ancestors are from, and read the description of the parish, not just the people that are in there or anything like that, but look at the histories of the town. It will tell you things like at the start of each of these descriptions, usually sometimes in trade directories and postal directories as well, you'll get this description, and it will tell you about the notable industries. It will tell you about the size and population. It will tell you about the number of churches, different kinds of churches and faiths that are in the town, and this might change. So look at a gazetteer when your ancestors are there, and then try and find another one and keep going and see how a town has changed in character over a number of years, because it may say that perhaps there used to be a coal mining industry here, but the mine dried up or something like that. And it will describe this, and it will say, the formerly, a pottery hub, and now much reduced, things like that, which might give you an idea. If you know your ancestors were potters, then you can say, perhaps then they've moved on, and that will give you an idea of why. So that's really useful to have that social historic context that you can get from contemporary documents. When we're looking in the modern day, it's a little harder because we're not there. But if we find some documents that describe things as someone's there, standing there, that's really, really useful for us. So that can really help. And it gives us that bit of understanding. And so let's take a look. See, Emma's saying half the ancestors went back and forth to Hackney for a few decades before they settled permanently. They seem to be connected to rural economic opportunities. That's very true. We said about those laws of migration. There are 4 big reasons for migration. They are usually economic. Obviously, everyone wants to make more money and have a better life. And this, again, applies even today. Social. So, a better quality of life, or be closer to your family or friends or anything like that. Political, you might be being persecuted for some reason. In Britain, there's a number of major persecutions throughout history and things, for example, the Highland clearances, or perhaps we talk about, say, whether you were Catholic or nonconformist, you wanted somewhere that you could worship in a little bit more privacy and less chance of being run out of town. And of course, if there's any kind of war coming, English civil wars were a big reason for migration again, or environmental. Perhaps there may be some floods or natural disasters, anything like that. One of the big migrations that if you have ancestors from the West Country and from places like Cornwall and Devon, you might be really interested in looking at population stats from there. As far as I remember, Cornwall is the only county that has a lower population now than it did in the Victorian era. Cornwall is one of those places that has definitely had a lot of external migration. People leaving. My own ancestors left Cornwall and went to Scotland, and a few of them went to a few other parts of the world, but mostly said my own direct ancestors got on must have been a horse and car or something, and possibly then a train, and travelled all the way up to Ayrshire. But the mines started to become less profitable, and it's not just miners, you see, that then have to suffer, because the people that worked in the mines and got their money then needed other things. So they needed blacksmiths, they needed, tradespeople, and all those people who were involved then needed to find other work because of this economy sort of collapsing a little bit. And of course, then you get those agents that we talked about earlier who thought, well, these people are really experienced in things like mining and the like. So why don't we ask to give them a free job and things, and maybe we'll send them to Michigan or New Jersey or somewhere like that. Or there are some mining communities from lots of Cornish people in, say, Australia as well, because these people knew how to do it, and that was a sure bet for the people who own the mines. So that's a fantastic way of finding our ancestors. But if you have, say, Cornish ancestors or Devon ancestors, that may be one reason why they moved. And if you look at the historic context, then that might give you an idea. And that's the same in other parts of the world too. So that's an important thing to see. Again, some more comments from Niall and from our lovely Findmypast voice. Friends in the Migration Museum who explore the Highland clearances. You can find, again, another link in the comments. Highland clearances are a very sad story, and which we'll again have to cover at some point. Nicole is from Dorset, looking to their partner's family history. They started off in Devon and moved east over the past few centuries. As we said a bit earlier, the step migration is one of those things where, they often move in stages and keep going. I wonder where they settled up. You'll have to tell us, where they ended up, and if they moved back and forth or if it was kind of steady. And also if they started in maybe villages, and if they moved to towns and maybe cities. And what their occupation was might also give some clues. When you've got ancestors who are things like agricultural labourers or just labourers, they can really turn their hand to anything unskilled. And so there are lots of opportunities that they would leap at if it meant that they could have some money, something to eat, and some shelter. So there's a lot of places you can find details of them. And then of course we have things like poor law and all this kind of thing that have things like settlement certificates and said people being relocated because of the fact that parishes had to pay for people with poor law. So there are other things that relate to your parish. You may find some details to see their parish of origin when they've migrated, even in the same county, to a different parish. So there are other records you can find too. I see Nini saying many Welsh communities migrated to find freedom for nonconformist faiths. As we mentioned, religion, lots and lots of nonconformist faiths, like we have the Methodists, Quakers, etc. There's a number of those records online, some great ones from again the West Country as well. There was a fairly large nonconformist community in Devon, as far as I remember, and quite a few in Cornwall too. Once you get to the late 1700s, 1800s, that's kind of the golden age of nonconformism. If you can't find your ancestors, take a look at those other records and see what goes on. And I always recommend as well, despite this not being non-conformist, take a look at our wonderful fleet marriages, because those at one point in the 1700s, about 1 in 6 marriages in England were taking place there. It was a very quick and easy way to get married without any people asking questions. You could go down, and it wasn't just people who had something to hide that might have gone there. It was people who just wanted to get it over with and didn't have to worry about things. So take a look at those collections too, if you can't find someone you're looking for. And so let's take a look at some more comments we've got here. Karen bought some old street maps from Alan Godfrey Maps. They highlighted the streets their ancestors lived in. They look for the church where their ancestors married, and they look in the streets in the surrounding areas because families usually live within that parish. That's true. It's really good to look at a map and to start to really understand where your ancestors are from. But I wouldn't limit yourself just to that parish. I would say there's a slightly wider area. People would travel for big events to that degree. Think about how far you could walk in a day, and then try and see in a few hours you could walk a few miles. So that's not so bad if you think of it that way. And think about the surrounding parishes as well. You might still find some people there. I see Jean there's bitter ancestors were lime burners in Closeburn in Dumfriesshire, then up to iron mines in Dalmellington and sandstone quarries in Mauchline, all documented in gazetteers, and the industry's closed and new ones started. That's a perfect illustration of what we're talking about. But these people, they knew how to do things in mines, so they're perfect people to employ in other slightly adjacent industries, and they're moving to where the work is. So that's exactly what might happen. Again, in the gazetteers, you'll see the industry closed and go, well, why have my ancestors left? And if you take a look at those gazetteers, you'll see a reason, and you'll understand it's not because they chose. They said, I fancy a better job. And it could be if, the industry's still there, but it may be because that opportunity is no more and they have to find a new one. That's really, really important. So let's take a look here. So Hazel said the train got as far as my ancestor's town in rural Aberdeen when he was an agricultural labourer. The following year, he's a railway porter in Aberdeen. I found the note that he'd been given a uniform. That's fantastic, isn't it, Hazel? That's good. So that shows you straight away there. I said the train comes in, and then they need again people to work on the trains. They must have gone up and down, and that would have been quite exciting, I guess. Imagine the feeling of some great new invention like that appearing and then being able to work on it every day. You must be very, very excited to go to work, and especially having a uniform as well. And Daphne said something very true. If there's a hole, you'll find a Cornishman down it. So that's very, very important to remember. And again, so my Cornish ancestors then became miners in Ayrshire. And I have one Cornish ancestor, a Captain Selwood, who became quite successful when he moved to America from Cornwall in this migration period, and he owned a lot of mines around Michigan and Minnesota and things like that, and became very, very rich. Unfortunately, he's not my ancestor, he's a cousin, so no money passed down my way. But in Duluth in Minnesota, there's a Selwood building which is quite tall, which is he built it, and that's one of those things that everyone can see. So it's quite interesting to know there's little bits of history. Amanda can prove their ancestry on 2 branches back to the Normans. Wow, one of the famous migrations ever. There are lots of really interesting historic migrations that I think we're all part of, even though we may not ever find records of it. So, of course, we have people like the Romans coming in and Romano-British culture. One of my prized possessions I have is a brooch, which I'll have to get out sometime. It's a Romano-British brooch, about 2,000 years old, a little bit later than that, and it's at the point where native Britons were trying to sort of merge with Roman culture, and so you have this merging of kind of Celtic and Roman style together, and it was used to sort of keep a cloak on, and it's really fantastic and really great to hold something so old, such a piece of history. And it shows again how cultures change and how people change who they perceive themselves to be based on things around them or things that are happening in history. So, if you think about how Britain used to be separate kingdoms, then it's the United Kingdom. And even now, there are a lot of questions about our identity and what we call ourselves and everything else. And so that can change so quickly in the space of different political movements, different things like that. And to understand a bit more about how our ancestors felt about things, again, might change different ways that they describe themselves in the census, or different things that they express themselves with, like costume, like culture, art, poetry. All these things are really interesting. If you look at very early Scottish culture, for example, the very early Scottish monarchs considered themselves French. in the sort of 11, 12, 1300s, and it was only a little bit later that Gaelic and Scots became being used at court, and they became really obsessed with poetry and Gaelic poetry because it was so beautiful to hear, and they were really, really excited by it. And then we've got other migrations like the Saxons and the Vikings and things who came and settled. And I'm sure all of us, again, have a little bit of Saxon or Viking blood in us, even though we might not find the records. We have lots of little other traits. It might be a little bit sort of lurking in your DNA. It might be some cultural things like your accent, certain words that you use or anything, or even the names of the towns that you live in. Lots of big things that you can find, really, really important. And again, the Saxons came. I did a little bit of studying the Saxons a while ago for something else, and it's fascinating how the Romans left Britain, and the native Romano-British were there. They just sort of considered themselves Roman, and the Saxons came, and they were saying, please help us, Rome. And the Saxons came, and now they're as part of culture as anyone else. But at the time, it was considered a terrifying scourge that was a punishment from God to take the decadent British and teach them a lesson. And the Romans sent them a message back saying you have to look to your own defenses, and that was when the Saxon era began. But a fascinating part of history, one of my favorite interesting elements, but we will have to talk about another time. But we're going much further back. But again, then we have those Normans, and those Normans brought along lots of their retainers, lots of knights, started families. And as we go further back and think about how many descendants they must have, a lot of us again will have Norman ancestors. We've got Huguenots. All those Huguenots that also came from France, Protestants coming and weaving lace, doing other kinds of things. I mean, even if we go further back, we've got the Celts themselves coming from further away and things, and from the Basque countries, people say. So there are so many historic migrations. But other than that, and other than say, we're all of migrant stock at some point and in some element. Let's talk about some of the other things that we've got here. So I see Victoria there's got a French Huguenot, Reverend Philip de Pont, on one side of the family back to the mid-1600s. He settled in Suffolk, and so did subsequent generations and nearby Essex too. There's another sort of migration rule that I found, and I can't remember who talked about this. It may have been Ravenstein again, but I know of this. So there are sort of three phases of migration. And I did this when I looked at Italian migration in the 1800s. And you get, first of all, with every culture, and you can apply this to any migrant community. Even now, if you take a look at some modern migrant communities in Britain, you'll see the different stages that these people are at. So first of all, you have the intrepid, brave folk who come. Usually, again, like as we talked about, they may be male. They might be, fairly professional, or able to afford this and maybe traveling around. But there'll be a handful of people, and a handful of people will go to this new place. Usually when we talk, this is long distance migration rather than short distance. They'll go to this new place and they'll settle in a little bit, and they'll make a living, and there'll be not many of them. Secondly, then you'll get a large group of people. They might start bringing their families, and they might start settling in for good, but they tend to cluster in one place where they can rely on each other. They don't have to perhaps know the language as well, because they can rely on other people to help them out, and they have other people that kind of inform them where they should go. Perhaps someone who's gone from that village who said, oh, maybe you should try Glasgow. Glasgow's really good. And then they've gone like that. And so you'll get this sort of cluster of a community. You see the Little Italy's, Chinatown, these sort of places. That's that kind of process. And then the third phase is the final phase, which is when people start to sort of completely branch out and spread throughout the community, and there is no sort of concentration anymore. So if we look at, say, the Huguenots, we know in London, in Spitalfields, there's a big concentration of those Huguenots, and over hundreds of years now, that's dissipated. And now, people who have Huguenot ancestors are all over the country. And so we see that process is completed. If we look at Italians, it started in the sort of early 1800s, and very few beforehand. We got these little things, and then we get Little Italy and places in Clerkenwell, places in Glasgow, places in other areas with these clumps of Italians, and then they again now mostly are fairly spread out and things. And we see other communities that are kind of at these different stages. So it's interesting to see that. And if you take a look at the census records and you look at your neighbors and look at a community and you understand a bit more about that, you might know maybe a bit more about where your ancestors are coming from, or about your ancestors' lives and the people that they're hanging around with, by getting an understanding of that. Same with, say, there are Irish communities as well. You see, people who move across from Ireland, they may be moving with a group of their friends and family, again, in the same way. And there are lots of sort of melting pots as well. So we see Anya saying Dundee is a good melting pot of Irish, Italian, and Polish. Once we get to the, in the modern era, the 1950s, 60s, and things, there's a lot more migration because it's easier and it's cheaper. The cost of migration, say, just across the channel, across the coast from America to Britain and back. I think the cost went down by about 300% in the space of 20 years in the mid-1800s. So you can see that difference, and then it becomes much easier to get across. And we can see lots and lots of people doing this, moving back and forth. And not only just staying once, they can come back with their family. Often I've seen my ancestors have gone to places like New York, and they've gone on their own as a lone man. And then they've brought their wife and children later, once they've settled down, once they've got a property and they've got a job, and they say, I can afford it. They send the money back and they do that. So that's quite common to see. Linda's found a lot of DNA matches in America. They're expecting to find a lot more, and that's quite common as well. We've got all these cousins, all these people around the world, and we've just got to find the connection to them. So that's really, really important and really great. I know we talked a little bit just before I said about those old artifacts. I see Amanda saying they've got 2 bronze rings they brought from shops, one from the Saxon times and one from the 1100s, a Crusader ring. The stories they could tell, you never know when our direct ancestors could have worn them. Well, we could have. It's possible. Nothing's impossible. I just think, we know every person has a story and every record tells a story, but there are some wonderful artifacts and objects that tell stories too. I found a relative that died relatively recently that I didn't know existed. They were a sort of great aunt, and they died in Canterbury. And it's interesting because I've got family just around there. They must have been around for just overlapping. And if they'd have known, they could have visited or seen them. But they, in their will, which I found on that wonderful, you can look at our National Probate Death Index for England and Wales, and you can take a look at those probates. And when you find the reference, find anything else, go to the government ordering a will site, and they're £1.50 at the moment. Absolutely great price, and it's a bargain. It's a steal. And it's full of detail. I was encouraged recently to look at a couple of wills that otherwise I probably wouldn't have bothered looking for. I had the probate, but I never ordered the will. It was just one of those things, on the list that you leave and you never get around to. And in there, I had extra family. I had children's names I didn't have, other children, and I had the surnames, married surnames of daughters who I hadn't found out who they married because their names were a bit common. So that's fantastic. That was my Whitehouses with a more common name. It's a bit harder. So really, really useful to get hold and get that extra info. So look at those wills and find this sort of extra information. And Jean said the wills are arriving in 48 hours at the moment. Well, I think exactly what I'm going to be doing as soon as this finishes. I'll have to go and order some more before the rush comes on. But that's really interesting. So yeah, I'm going to get some more of those. But those wills, they will give you lots of detail, and they can give you details of residencies, details of other things, and that will give you lots of extra information as well. And we're seeing some earlier wills as well, people talking about those. Andrew Davis is saying Michelle Keegan has traced her family back to Genoa via Gibraltar. Well, the Genoese, we all know about those, the famous traders traveling around from place to place. So I can see that. You can see a little bit of that story in there. So that's quite interesting. And, when people go to the sea, I know my Sicilian ancestors spent a lot of time in Malta because, of course, they were on the coast and Malta's there, and they would travel back and forth. And I know a couple of them died there, and a couple of them had family there. So it's interesting to see that. And you've got to think about that context, learn about people's occupations as well, to learn about how they moved and where the core parts of that business are. So as we talked about miners in different places, perhaps, if your ancestors were copper miners and then suddenly they disappear, look at other heavy copper mining areas, or even just other mining areas, because of course it's quite applicable in different ways. We can go for there. So here we go. So Kath has said her 3 times grandmother was born in 1810 on a ship to America. Can't trace her at all. You might have to give a bit more information on that one, Kath, but I think if you've got some details of her birth and you know she was on her way to America, so I would start on the sort of passenger arrival list, see what's there. At that point, they probably won't be very detailed, and you won't have any people leaving. When we look at passenger lists in the UK, 1890 was the year that the Board of Trade had to ask for a second copy of all of these passenger lists. Passenger lists have been made through history all the time, but they've not really been kept. So if you're asking for passenger lists from this sort of early point, probably doesn't exist. There are handfuls, and we do have them online, and we got them from the National Archives. Really nice collection, but it's handfuls. That's it. You need to mostly look in arrivals, because people are more interested in people who arrive in a country than people who leave. You've got to deal with them when they arrive. When they leave, you just wave at them, and that's that. So passenger arrivals are really interesting. I think in the United States, you'd probably be a bit later for some better ones. There might be some early ones. I think that might be slightly too early, but start with looking at, I'm guessing if she traveled, she would travel with her parents. Because she was born there, so she's got her mother and father there on the boat. Try and find families, perhaps in the American censuses, and see if you can find a matching family and work from that. And if you go to, these later censuses have things like number of years in the UK, in the US, and that might see if it can match up with these plausible families. See if you can find someone there. And of course, don't assume they stayed in New York. They may have moved further on. I see a lot of people talking about the Huguenots. I see, Janet, you have a very sort of French surname, so perhaps it's come from there. Forgive me if not. But her Huguenots escaped from Valenciennes at 1600 and settled in Canterbury. They were mainly merchants, gentlemen, and silk weavers. Fast forward 120 years, and my branch moved to Spitalfields. They were weaving silk until the 1860s, when the last weaver died and watchmaking took over. Oh, that's a fascinating story. That's really interesting. Graham's got a story. There we go. Interested to find an organisation called the Grappling Corps. Now, I've never heard of that. Let's find out about this. Based in Runcorn in Cheshire, believed to be the only one in the UK. They started in the 1890s. They used ropes with grappling hooks on the end to hopefully rescue people who fell in the canals or Manchester Ship Canal, or if not, to try and find and pull up the drowned bodies from the bottom. Wow, that's something I've not heard about. I'm sure our newspapers will be a huge source of finding out more about that. That's a really interesting one. That's interesting too. So I see we've got a wonderful blog here about 1890 to 1960. We mentioned the passenger list that we have, all the busy ports, the occupations that might emigrate, and all the peaks and troughs of travel. That might be really interesting for you to take a look at. And there's a link in the comments for there, so that would be great. Karen got her second great-grandfather's will yesterday. Really interesting. That's good. We talked about wills. Karen has said, if there's a probate, does that mean there's also a will to read? Yes. If we're looking at that index, that National Probate Death Index, which is a lot easier to search than the government probate website, because you can search by name without putting a year in or anything like that, which you can't do on the government site. Then you take that reference and you plug it in to the government site to get your will. Really, really important, because if it's there, you'll hopefully get the documents involved. So they may just be the administration. Hopefully it's the will as well. But whatever it is, there are some documents waiting for you, and you should definitely take a look, because even if it's just the administration, it will tell you things like those people who get money and who administers it, and things like who executes the will. So that's really relevant. And the same in Scotland. If you look at the National Calendar of Inventories, they call it, I believe, you can see the Scottish Probate Index in the same way. And that also leads you to wills, although they're stored in a slightly different way. I just found my great-grandfather's in an Ayrshire court set of records, and that was another sort of 10 or so pages of details of who gets what, who's provided for, all this kind of thing. So again, lots of detail, tells you about family, and might tell you about those people that have also moved away. So that's interesting too. Anya's saying, get digging on Google. Really true. Search for things like your names of people, surnames, full names, years of birth and death. See what comes through. You might find them on a website, might be someone's public site, might be on a library site, anything like that. Really, really useful, really helpful. Always take a look on Google. Gillian has said, where can we order wills from? I'm sure there'll be some links there. So here we go. So Cindy's put a link in there, so I'm going to put that across, and you'll be able to find there too. There we go. So it's that probatesearch.service.gov.uk. But also remember, I said our national probate death index is where you can use our index to search, and you can find those names and dates much more easily. So use that first, and then you can look at that page and take it across, and that could be really useful. Okay, so here we go. So Nini said one female ancestor gave them married names for 5 daughters in Mill. An absolute treasure. Look at that. 5 married names. That would be a gold mine for family history research, and I would really enjoy seeing that. So that's really good. A lot of people saying that wills are amazing. Amanda, their wills are amazing. Very interesting stories as a result. That's good. Linda is currently writing up boot and shoe industry in Northampton. Some born there, previously labourers, and others in London moved to Northampton to continue in the trade. I know someone I remember who has some ancestors who owned factories, boot factories in Northampton. I know there was a roaring trade there, wasn't there? So that's interesting. And yeah, sometimes we'll just follow the business, and that following the business might not be the same as everyone following the population. So bear in mind, as well as looking at general statistics, look at things that are relevant to your ancestor too, because it might give you that little bit of, we talk about that backwards migration. Every sort of migration has that counter migration. It may be that. It may be, let's look at London, for example, now. London is so expensive that some people are moving out of London because they can't afford it, or because they can get better value somewhere else, and they can get another job doing the same thing somewhere else. So, you see that, again, counterflow, because so many people are coming in, some people are coming out, and they might move to Bristol or to somewhere else. So, you can see that in action in the modern day. And it's interesting how our ancestors, they might wear different clothes and have different hairstyles, but they are basically the same as us. And so you see the same things. If you might do it, they might do it. So think about it in that way. We're seeing here, Sue has said, my ancestors went from East Anglia to Massachusetts during the Great Migration. They left for religious reasons, as many did. Although greater religious tolerance was achieved, some of the women were persecuted for being witches. Whoa. I had no idea until a DNA test. Very proud of their achievements. That is interesting. In terms of witches, I went to have a look at the witch fountain in Edinburgh just the other day with a little regular walk we're allowed. And that witch fountain talks about the misunderstandings that caused these terrible sentences to be enacted. And look out for some new records in the near future that might help to tell those stories a bit more, because they are fascinating and they're interesting, that a lot of these people, were trying to do good and were misunderstood or something like that. And sometimes, jealousy or a vendetta might have caused, someone to lose their life and things. There's a lot of tales there. And again, that's something we could go into another time, but we're, we've got all this other stuff to talk about. It's so easy to talk about family history, isn't it? And get on these tangents and go in different ways. So it's an absolute joy. I see you're asking about a canal presentation. That could be interesting. I think I know someone that could help us with that as well. So canals and waterways and the people who worked on them and how they worked. Oh, I'm getting excited at that idea. That's a good one, isn't it? That's great. So that's something that we should maybe look into. Do keep telling us the sort of things that you want to see in these presentations, and we'll get on them. I know, I believe it's next week, we're going to be breaking some hearts, when we're going to be talking about coats of arms and tartans and clans and all that sort of thing, and finding out a little bit more about them, because I think there are some commonly held misconceptions that you'd be completely forgiven for thinking. So no one's going to be shouted at, but I think you might leave there with a bit more of an understanding of how it all works, and you might have a bit more of a skeptical eye by the end of it. So watch this space, and I think I can imagine some of you already nodding your head and knowing what we're going to be talking about, but that's going to be an exciting thing. I see Victoria talking about loving a kilt. There may be some kilt photographs, not of me, I don't think. I think the photographs of me in a kilt could be kept well away from the public, but there will definitely be kilts and there will definitely be tartans. There'll be lots of that, so that'll be really interesting to talk about. And yes, we will be lots and lots of people finding out which tartan that they're allowed to wear, and the answer may surprise you. I know you see that phrase on the internet quite a lot. I see everyone so that's interesting. So look out for that next week. That will be coming. So yes, it won't just be tartans, it'll be clans, and it won't just be Scottish, because we'll have coat of arms and all kinds of things, surname origins. We'll talk about all of these things and what we really mean, and the truth behind some of these things that said are, I think, commonly held family history misconceptions. And running through in our last 5 minutes, again, we've got these wonderful records we've talked about. So definitely take a look at those. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, go and read and check out those links. If not, then go into your settings and make sure you are, because every week you'll get some new exciting presents in your inbox, which will tell you about the new records we've released. Because every week it might be your time, and so I can't wait for some of the things coming up. Some great things. Amanda remembers watching Olivia Colman's episode of Who Do You Think You Are? She thought her family history would be very boring. She discovered she had Indian ancestry, more exotic and exciting than she thought. That sums it all up, really. There are lots of stories that come through, and lots of stories that mean a lot to all of us, and they cover the world over. Even if we think, we are, as dry as white bread, we actually have all kinds of different history and culture and different places inside and things to talk about. Bridget has her mother was half black and white, but never knew her white father, only his name. They've now found the whole Edwards clan, traced all the way back to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. Wish I could meet these family in these faraway lands. I mean, right now, perhaps not so much, but don't say a never. And there'll be many, many more opportunities, I'm sure, in the coming years. I wouldn't say coming months. We'll see what happens, and we'll go from there. I see Terry, Rose is saying when the 1921 census will come out. That's a good question. In this country, in England and Wales, 1921 census, the Census Act means we have to wait 100 years, and that is 100 calendar years. So it'll be 2022 that we'll be looking, rather than 2021. So, you see the 21, you think it's 100 full years. So we've got to go to the next year over. So we've got a little bit longer to wait, but we're all very excitedly hurrying for that one. That's going to be exciting. Terry has asked, will Findmypast ever do a TV channel? I know we have social media platforms, which is great. I think the problem with having to do a TV channel is that we've got to stay on it all the time. Maybe one day we'll do a marathon, see if we can do 24 hours or something like that for all of you and talk family history for that long. But I think it's going to be very hard for all of us to stay awake all that time and keep talking. I definitely am going to carry on with my iced tea. But yes, we definitely love to talk to you, though, and do keep looking. Every Monday, I think we publish our little schedule about Findmypast from home. And we'll be, continuing to present all kinds of things. And if you have ideas for presentations, keep asking as well. Have we done that one? So Janet has had an idea. Old photographs, not dating by costumes, but types of photographs on glass, on tin, carte de visite, etc., and photographers. That's an interesting one. I've been experimenting over lockdown and trying different things with wet plate photography, really old Victorian photographs, trying to make my own. And it's remarkably complicated, but I'm almost getting the hang of it. So almost taking some old photographs. And I've got a few weird experiments that maybe I'll share one time, but it is fantastic to do. And a great hobby that maybe, it might be worth taking up, but make sure you have a dark room to develop those pictures. And I see, Niall, it's our wonderful thing, has said, who would want us to do a Findmypast 24-hour marathon? If you build it, they will come, perhaps. What a way to consider. That would be something. Perhaps we could do something together. That would be an interesting one. We'll have to plan it out very well. That would be a big one, wouldn't it? I know there are all kinds of digital conferences this year. Maybe we do a digital 24-hour family history run, where we could do everything, solve people's brick walls and talk about things, do presentations, just have a chat. That would be a big thing. That would be something, wouldn't it? I know, Anya, you're saying like Roots Tech type thing. I think we'll have to see. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, because it's all got to be planned by far cleverer people than I. So let's leave them to do it and let's see what happens. But if someone plans to do it, then I'm sure I would feature and help as much as possible. But that's great. David has yet to find an ancestor outside the south or east of England. They're feeling left out. Well, that's the thing. As we talked about, migration is not just country to country. So even if they've moved parish to parish or county to county, that's still important. And there are still some rules you can apply based on what we're looking at. So don't feel left out, David. And of course, the more ancestors you find, when you work forwards as well and you work to those cousins, then you might find there's cousins who've gone as well. So that's really, really important. And that's a big thing. And Emma wants a photography session. That sounds interesting. That's good. Their great-grandfather lived in the South Kensington Museum with the pioneers of photography in the Royal Engineers. And Cindy said, only if we got the band back together, we do a live broadcast. I don't know if that means we're going to present a performance of our band, because we've talked about that for a while, or if you just mean just getting us all together on one broadcast, which would be organized chaos, wouldn't it? That would be one thing. But what greater panel of minds could you ask your question to? So that's a big thing. But yes, it's been quite a thought. So I'll leave that with them. As we get to that point, and on that note, we have hit the hour. It's so easy, isn't it, to get through. I hope some of these tips and these things that we've talked about have helped, or have at least been interesting. Fridays are a little bit less organized and more free form, as we say. So I hope that you've been excited by the new records, and by talking about them and talking about your own migration stories and talking to each other, which is always great, especially in today's climate. It's great that we can talk and share our family history, because there's always one family historian per family. And it's great that we're all gathering together in the Findmypast forum, or we're sending messages now on family trees to people who might have a relative on their tree to try and talk about different things. And we have lots of ways to share our wonderful hobby, and it's great to share my excitement with you and to see your excitement. It's really exciting. So thanks very much for joining, and I know I'll be seeing you again next week, and I'm sure other people will also be here next week. Always keep an eye on our Facebook page to see what's coming up, and join that Findmypast forum to see again what's happening. Ask your questions and have some chat, and I'll try and pop in and see if there are any more questions I can answer after this. But other than that, I know we're all back indoors wherever we are around the world, most of us definitely. So have fun exploring not only these new records, but all the records we've talked about. Take a look at some of those long-standing brick walls. Ask perhaps for some help on that Findmypast forum. Talk to each other, and stay safe. Keep well. And I really hope to see you again very, very soon. Take care.